Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Near Memo with David, Mike, and Greg. Today we're going to be talking about Google and Google and Google again in different facets, like the three blind men and the elephant. It's all about the elephant, which in this case is Google.
Some of these are at oblique angles, we might even say.
Yes, and there's a lot of stuff that's happened. OpenAI released its GPT store, which we will be talking about in the context of Google. There was an interesting new little hardware device that contains a virtual assistant. It's kind of a funky little thing for $199. We'll be talking about that in the context of Google. Mike has done some very interesting research on the LSA scams that he will be elaborating, and we're going to be talking about the Verge article on SEO that just came out. Their sort of follow-up to their initial controversial piece on SEO, the people who ruined the web.
Yeah, I would take issue with that even being described as an article, this latest one about SEO. I think it's more about sort of Google's.
It's about Google. It's not about SEO.
Ecosystem.
Yeah. I stand corrected. It's not about SEO per se. It's about Google and the way in which Google has reshaped how people are building websites and creating content. And I think that's all we're going to be talking about. So let's get into it. Mike, you are the lead.
Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah. I didn't steal all your thunder. Go ahead. Tell people what you discovered.
I've gone down the rabbit hole this last week. Instead of doing the work I should be doing of exploring multi-location leads and research, I've been interviewing businesses that have been ostensibly honest businesses that have been negatively impacted by the Google Guarantee LSA scam. So I spoke with a carpet cleaner in England who has contends that he has lost 70% or 60% of his business. The interesting sort of upshot of that was that he was prepared to fight fire with fire, that the LSA scam that we've been talking about, the local service ad scam, where fake reviews, fake business listings, fake licenses, bait and switch scamming of end users, of consumers. He contends that he's lost such a significant portion of his income that he's prepared to fight fire with fire by buying fake reviews and competing, although he contends that he would not do the bait and switch at the end. I also spoke with a marketer of HVAC and duct build work that has been dealing with this directly. He's reported this to Google numerous times since the summer when it started. He saw ad prices in the vertical go from $40 to roughly $70 a month. He saw a lot of loss in their
per click,
clients.
Right? Not per month.
Per click, not per month. Per lead. Per click, yeah. Per lead. He saw a lot of clients who would call and make an appointment and then change their mind. They would reference the $99 quote, so they were losing a lot of business on the intake side. His interview was in our newsletter from Thursday. And I also spoke with a foreign national who owns, or was originally a foreign national. I think he's either naturalized or certainly he owns a business in Florida, Central Florida, doing HVAC. And he's been fighting this scam too because his business is impacted. He described to me how this scam works, which is fascinating. Basically, there are WhatsApp groups of this nationality that, a lot of expatriates in South Florida that regularly converse in WhatsApp. One of the members offers up a fully endowed local service ad listing with a fake license and 4,000 reviews from who knows what business. Now, as an aside to that, I also found legitimate businesses reviews being used on fake listings this week. A duct cleaner in the Washington, D.C. area is using Stanley Steamer reviews from their location in Palatine, Illinois. And it's interesting because there are owner responses and the reviews look legitimate as opposed to the reviews from an attraction. So maybe the scammers are getting more sophisticated. Anyways, somebody comes into these WhatsApp groups for $1,500. You can buy one of these listings. You buy the LSA listing. You then contract with South Asian answering service for $1 a call or less. And then you start generating leads for $50, $60 a lead in the duct cleaning, which you then bring back into these same WhatsApp groups. You share with other those that don't have their own lead gen service who are looking for work. They then, they're told that the quote was $99. These workers are typically undocumented or do not have permanent residency, and they split the profit of the sale. Now, since the driver has to go out to the site and the ad costs $70, nobody does this work for $99. Every one of these jobs gets upsold 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, even 10 times we've seen on the end. And that profit is then split with the worker. The worker typically drives to the location in an unmarked van with no labeling. So it's very difficult to track this down. When they've reported this to the authorities in Florida, similar to the consumer report that we wrote about last week, the authorities have no interest in pursuing it. Part of the reason is that it's very difficult to track down the lead gen companies, let alone who's selling the local service ads. I mean, ultimately, this system of what ends up being both business loss and consumer loss is created by Google in their effort to grow their advertising business in an area where theoretically they had all these controls in place of checking the businesses, checking the workers, checking their licenses, validating the businesses, forcing them through a fairly detailed process. And yet somehow these businesses are filtering in and taking over these spots in multiple industries, not just in duct cleaning and not just in the United States, but in England and elsewhere in the world. And Google knows about it. These businesses have told me they've repeatedly reported it. I've communicated with Google Ad liaison, and they knew about it from my point of view in early December. They've known about it for months, and we've seen virtually no action of taking down what is clearly has become criminal activity.
Just a quick question to clarify, Mike. Can you explain how these businesses are able to attach reviews that have nothing to do? I mean, you did this before. Have nothing to do with the lead buyer themselves. How do they get those attached to those LSA ads?
According to Crystal Horton, who does a lot of LSA work, she says that the support structure in India is very...
Google's support structure
in India, which is outsourced, is very loosey-goosey about allowing businesses to switch which business URL is associated with the LSA. The same LSA listing can appear in multiple markets, but it's only associated with one Google listing. And so you might be a business with 20 or 30 Google listings, and you might want to change which listing is associated with the LSA. So you communicate with support, and then support willingly just changes it. Apparently, they don't vet this very carefully. And so people are using public attractions, parks, and in the case that I mentioned earlier, Stanley Steamer, because they had 2,100 great reviews with owner responses.
In the vertical, right? So anybody reading the
reviews... Well, more or less in the vertical.
Yeah.
It looked like they were in the vertical. It wasn't clear that it was a recreation spot anyways, right? So if somebody went to read the reviews, it wouldn't be immediately obvious. So it makes it all the more compelling for the 20% of the people who do read reviews. I mean, it's a scam, plain and simple. Clearly, the foreign nationals involved with it are taking advantage of it and engaging in illegal work. But ultimately, this is Google's system that they've totally sort of dropped the ball on and have created a huge problem that is appears to be global in nature. And if it isn't global yet, it soon will be, because it's easy pickings.
Well, and it's boosting, as you point out, the guy in South Florida, I believe you said, saw the ad prices go from the click prices or the lead gen values go from $40 a lead to $70 a lead. That's almost double in a very compressed period of time, which, if you're a cynic, you say Google likes that because they're generating more revenue for themselves, and they would allow this fraud to flourish because it means more revenue. Now, if you believe Google is well-intentioned, then they're simply not investing the requisite resources that they need to police the system. The truth is probably,
or if you think they're really well-intentioned, they're allowing the system, they're gathering all this data so that they can strike.
Yeah. Well,
That's what Carter Maslin told me in 2008.
This is a 16-year-old strategy on their part. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, that they tolerate a lot of stuff as a cost of their operation, and they don't have any accountability. Maybe we'll see that in Europe, but in the United States, they don't have any accountability. But they're not entirely condoning fraud despite their knowledge of its existence. They just simply don't have enough people devoted to cleaning up these schemes.
Well, I would like to go on record, though, and predict that when this does get uncovered in the press more assertively and more visibly, Google's going to say, quote, "There's a lot of bad actors out there. We deal with them every day. They get more sophisticated. We've taken action." And that's the end of the story from Google's point of view. And 6 months later, we'll see the exact same problem, maybe in a different vertical. But I've looked at enough of these to know that this is how Google handles these from a press point of view. And then they prioritize this problem wherever they prioritize it in their 100 list problems. And they may or may not get to it in 6 months, a year, 2 years.
You're drafting the press release for them right now, right, Mike?
That's right.
The quotes.
Well, you really could copy and paste. I mean, this is something they could very easily run through Bard and just, have these ready to go for every single one of these issues. So
they probably do.
Yeah, I also would say my guess is that the person responsible for the principal inside of Google who was responsible for the launch of LSAs has been rotated to some completely different division, because that is how you move up in Google, is getting exposure in all these different product groups, right? And so the people who know how the system was supposed to set up are long gone, and the new people who have been rotated in don't have any institutional knowledge over how the system was set up, what some of the vulnerabilities might be. And as you said, both of you guys have said, like the incentives are actually skewed in the opposite direction, at least for now, in terms of driving up lead prices, which is going to make their performance portfolio look better internally. So I think that there's a whole bunch of totally misaligned corporate incentives inside of Google when it comes to exactly these kinds of issues, where you really need someone with deep institutional knowledge of the product to actually try to enforce some of these, or try to cut down on some of these bad actors. So.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.